Today is Saturday, May 17th. The rate of autism diagnoses has been rising for years, and recently U.S. Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. reignited a national conversation by promising to find a cause by September. So, what do we actually know about the increase in autism diagnoses already? And how do people with autism feel about all of this? We have two perspectives for you today. Later in the show, we're breaking down the data with economist and Parent Data founder Emily Oster to understand how diagnoses have risen over time and what the research so far says does and does not explain that rise. But first, a powerful personal perspective from Paul Loudon, an autism advocate and public speaker who lives with autism. He opens up about what autism really feels like, why he says political debates miss the point, and what he wants people to better understand overall. Welcome to the Newsworthy Special Edition Saturday, when we sit down with a different expert or celebrity every Saturday to talk about something in the news. Don't forget to tune in every Monday through Friday for our regular episodes, where we provide all the day's news in 10 minutes. I'm Erica Mandy. It's now time for today's Special Edition Saturday. Paul Loudon, thank you so much for joining us here on the Newsworthy.
Thank you for having me.
First, just tell us about your own experience being diagnosed with autism and what difference that did or did not make for you.
So I was diagnosed about 19 years ago now, and at the time I was already an adult. I was 23. It was an issue where I was already having the issues in life that I was having. The diagnosis isn't the point where you get autism, as it were. It's the point where you get the tools necessary to help understand what you're experiencing and look for new ways to interpret it and address it. So for me, it was a very hopeful moment, because it meant that all these things I've been struggling with for more than 2 decades, I now suddenly had context to put them in. It's one of those things where if you're struggling in life and you don't know why you're struggling, you just know that you are struggling, it can be very alienating, it can be very depressing, but I have some tools to mitigate and really work on it, because now I have the opportunity to go, oh, hey, the fact that I can't really understand some of these things going on around me, that's not me not trying hard enough. That's not me being a failure. That's me having a brain that works in a different way. My tool is that knowing that it works that way, I can advocate for myself. I can tell people, hey, I do not understand that. I'm going to ask you to try to understand me instead. And so it really changes the dynamic between me and the people around me in terms of how I can approach situations where I'm struggling.
Similarly, you've posted to Instagram that autistic people don't struggle with being autistic. They struggle because the world is not built for them. So how do you think society can help with that?
One thing I like to say is that all disability is actually social, that all disability is created by society. And it sounds really intense and really extreme when I say it like that, but if you start thinking about it, imagine that all people were born without working legs, that wheelchairs were just the norm. And, it's a little unrealistic to imagine that, but if that were the case, no building would ever require stairs for entry. Nothing would ever be too high up to reach from a wheelchair. We would have a society where being in a wheelchair wasn't a disability because it was something that everyone experienced. It's similar with autism in that the autism itself isn't necessarily a disability on its own. It's a disability because it prevents us from interacting with what society has constructed around us in the way that society expects us to interact. And I'm not going to say that autism just flat out isn't a problem, but the parts of it that change it from just being a struggle to a real significant disability are often social constructs about the expectation that we make eye contact, that we do job interviews in a certain way, that we have to go out and renew things in person or this or that there are so many social things where we cannot access the same society and tools as everyone else unless we access it in a way that a non-autistic person accesses it. And sometimes the hurdle for that is too high for us to be able to do it consistently or well.
As you hear RFK Jr. promise to announce a cause of autism by September, what was your reaction to that?
I think that trying to boil autism down to a cause is frankly a little bit just not the right approach. Because if you look at someone who's limping and you say, I'm going to find the cause for limping, you're not going to say, I'm going to find the cause for that person limping. You say, I'm going to find the cause for limping. Well, limping can be caused from a sprained ankle. Limping can be caused from a congenital deformity. Limping can be caused because there's a pebble in your shoe. There are literally nearly infinite ways that someone could have limping as a condition, as a problem. And we know that autism is a developmental disability. We know that it is from the brain developing differently. They have developed different areas having more activity than others compared to a neurotypical brain. You can't really just say, well, there's got to be only one cause for that. You can say, hey, this is a collection of symptoms and behaviors that cause from the brain developing differently. There could be any number of causes from that, from nutrition, childhood illness, to congenital things. There are so many things.
How do you feel about talking about treatments or even what some people might refer to as a cure? Can it be beneficial, or does it imply that, something is wrong and needs to be fixed when actually it doesn't need to be?
One of the most important things is that there should be no discussion about us without us. That often people talk about what we're going to do to people with autism to cure them, rather than developing ideas that include our own agency in that idea, that they talk with us and they're like, well, okay, what does quality of life look like to you? What does happiness look like to you? How do we achieve that based on what your personal life or desires or experiences are? And so I think that's a big missing piece, is that to some of us with autism, we want a cure. We want to experience the world the same way other people do. To others of us with autism, we see it as a mark of our identity. We see it as so fundamental to us that we would be different people if it were changed. And so rather than talking about a cure for autism, I think the question is how do we allow people who have autism or other neurodivergencies to lead a life that has a similar quality to those who are not diagnosed with those sort of things, be it social changes to allow us to integrate into society, or treatments available to us if we start to find things. We, those with autism, should have the option which one of these we want. But at the same time, the final goal should be to allow us to have the same quality of life as someone who does not have one of these diagnoses.
Overall, what do you think people most misunderstand about autism?
I'm going to start with the word autism. The word autism comes from the term "aut" for zero. The original thought was that we were kind of zeroed out as a person, that we were not experiencing certain emotions or certain social feelings. We were missing something fundamental. And a lot of modern research has almost shown that it could be the opposite, where we are so sensitive to certain things, the emotional responses of the people around us, that can be so overwhelming that we have a hard time processing it or interpreting it or internalizing it. And so we found that what these symptoms look like and where they come from may sort of be contrary to sort of your gut reaction or your common sense. So when people talk about curing autism or making sure no more autistic babies are born, a lot of times what's being heard is, I would rather you didn't exist than you had autism. And that really can be depressing, can be upsetting, can lead a child thinking that their parent doesn't want them. And so the kind of language you use about autism and the way you talk about it is really, really important. That you're making sure they feel that, what you want is what's best for them and their living experience with autism, and not what's best for you, in that, they are an inconvenience to you, or you wish they weren't there, or whatever. Because that's often the messaging that we sort of hear when people talk about curing us.
And I know you're making such a difference, posting on social media, your own advocacy work, your book. Is there anything else you want to add that we haven't talked about yet?
I want to add this for the people with autism who hear this. I know that right now, there's a lot of talk about us that's sort of frightening or can be really depressing. I just want to remind all of you out there that it is your life, and you get to decide what is a successful life to you. You don't have to have the same goal that society kind of says is the right goal to have. You've seen in movies that, you're supposed to get a girlfriend, get a career, etc. What you should look for is what will make you comfortable and happy. And that can be what you decide, not what you've heard or been told is the right thing, or what you've been told will make you happy.
Still ahead, Emily Oster joins us to break down the evidence available so far, making it clear what we do and don't already understand about the rise of autism diagnoses. In addition to being a professor of economics at Brown University and a New York Times best-selling author, Emily Oster is the founder and CEO of Parent Data, which translates the latest scientific research into answers to the questions parents have in their daily lives. Emily Oster's books, Expecting Better, Crib Sheet, The Family Firm, and The Unexpected, have sold over 1 million copies. Today, she'll explain why some people view the rise in autism diagnoses as a good thing, and others see it as a negative, and what the numbers really tell us about it all. But first, a quick break for our sponsors. Calling all families who are ready to say goodbye to sticky notes and calendar confusion. The Skylight calendar is here to keep your family organized. And oh my, I can tell you from experience, it makes all the difference. It's a Wi-Fi connected digital display that showcases your family's schedule with clarity, color, and style. You can keep it on a counter or hang it beautifully on the wall, and it makes managing events, grocery lists, meal planning, and more so much easier and more streamlined. You can even assign colors so every family member knows what they need to do, including having kids check off routines or chores in a way that makes it fun. I love that there's a free Skylight Companion app, too, so I can easily add or update everything even while on the go. Plus, your happiness is Skylight's happiness. So get this, if in 120 days you are not 100% thrilled with your purchase, you can return it for a full refund, no questions asked. And right now, Skylight is offering our listeners $30 off their 15-inch calendars by going to skylightcal.com/newsworthy. Go to skylightcal.com/newsworthy for $30 off your 15-inch calendar. That is skylightcal.com/newsworthy. The Newsworthy is also brought to you by Honeylove. From my past experience with shapewear, I admit I was a bit skeptical about trying any new brands. They felt ugly, constantly rolled up, and just didn't feel worth it. But Honeylove has set the new standard, and I've been so impressed. Honeylove shapewear addresses all of my previous concerns. It never rolls up or down, it actually feels cute and comfortable on, and it supports at all the right places while letting me breathe and not feel restricted. For any special event now, whether I'm a wedding guest, event speaker, or just have a fancy night out, I turn to Honeylove. And I appreciate that Honeylove shapewear is designed for every body, providing support that feels custom made. And by the way, Honeylove is not just about shapewear. They also have incredibly comfortable and stylish leggings, bras, and more. So treat yourself to the most comfortable shapewear on earth and save 20% off site-wide at honeylove.com/newsworthy. Use our exclusive link to get 20% off at honeylove.com/newsworthy. After your purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them, so please support our show and tell them we sent you. Experience the new standard in shapewear with Honeylove. Okay, now to my conversation with Emily Oster. So when we're looking at autism rates specifically, can you first lay out the kind of two, maybe more schools of thought when it comes to the rise in autism diagnoses?
In the kind of camp that RFK is in, what you're seeing or what this is reflecting is a very large increase in the patterns of behavior that characterize autism. So just increases in symptoms, and that is a cause for concern. And on the other side, on the side that sort of the CDC is traditionally been more in, this rise in diagnoses reflects just a rise in the number of people we're diagnosing and the changes in how we diagnose, and that in fact is a good thing because it means people who in the past would not have been able to get the help they need are now able to get the help that they need to get the support that they need to thrive. And so actually, more diagnosis is a good thing, not a bad thing. So those are really the two camps.
What does the data say?
The data provides a fair amount of support for the role of diagnosis in explaining at least some of this increase. So there are a bunch of things that have happened over the past 20 years, changes in how we do screening, changes in how they recommend diagnosing autism, what's classified as autism. There have been changes in the kind of incentives for parents in a school system to have their kids diagnosed. So there are a few changes like this, and when you look at data on what happens around those changes, you can see that it really changes diagnosis rates, that it's pretty clear that at least a good share of the increase over time is a result of people who previously would not have been diagnosed now being diagnosed. And one sort of auxiliary piece of that is we've seen a change in the demographics of who's diagnosed. So many more girls, people are being diagnosed at older ages who were not diagnosed younger, and more Black and Hispanic individuals who might not have had access to services before who are now getting diagnosed because of more universal screening. So that seems to explain at least some of the increase. And what I think is unclear is exactly how much of it.
So there's certain clear data, and then there are still some questions. Is there anything else you want to add to the list when it comes to what is very clear and what we still have questions about?
It's worth thinking a little about the numbers. So if you ask, how much does diagnosis explain? Based on these different things we've looked at, I think the answer lies somewhere between 60% and 100%. And that's a pretty big range. And what we don't have is, really detailed information kind of diving into exactly how much it is. Depending on where you fall in this, it's 60% or it's 100%, depending on exactly what that number is, we can then ask, what else is responsible for this increase? And there, I actually think it's pretty unclear what else would be in that category. And that's really what's so frustrating and confusing about these data.
And you've talked about some of the other roles like genetics. What do you know about genetics and the role it plays?
So we know that genetics plays a very large role in the sense that autism is very heritable. So if you have, identical twins, the chance that if one of them's autistic, the chance the other one is very, very high, close to 100%. So we have very high estimates of heritability of autism characteristics. It is possible that autism is both very heritable and very genetically caused, and that the increase is about changes in diagnosis. Those things are very consistent. So that actually doesn't answer this question for us about what is responsible for the rise, because it is not changes in genetics that's responsible for the rise.
But changes in environmental factors is one of the arguments. So what can you tell us about that?
It is very difficult to say anything conclusive on changes in environmental factors. There are some links, like there is a link with lead exposure. So we know that environmental factors can change autism rates. Kids who have a very high exposure to lead are more likely to be diagnosed with autism. But many of these have a hard time explaining the changes over time. So for example, lead exposure has gone down quite a lot over time. So that's not going to be the explanation. There are, correlational studies, but nothing strongly causal that would suggest that environmental factors are important. That doesn't rule them out, but there isn't some smoking gun like this is the environmental factor that matters. We don't have anything close to that in the data.
And there's been talk about vaccines. So let's address that. What does the data say?
I mean, this is one place where the data is quite clear that there is not a link. So we have large-scale studies which compare, kids who are vaccinated to kids who are not, which do not show any link between vaccination and autism. And so this is actually something we've pretty conclusively ruled out in the data, and also something for which there isn't any mechanistic reason to think that the two would be linked. So that is not the explanation. That doesn't tell us what is the explanation, but it isn't vaccinations.
And autism rates or other topics, data and studies can be confusing for the average person. We see on social media all the time that people are misinterpreting studies. So can you just speak to why it's important to look at the data and actually understand it?
Part of the reason is that there are a lot of studies out there, and there is, as you say, I think a lot of misinformation, and a lot of what we see on social media is people cherry picking, one or two studies, or cherry picking a particular result. And because it is very difficult for people to really process a whole literature, that's not most people's job. People are doing other things, rightly so. I think what I see as my job as really trying to look at all the data together and help people process what's information, what's misinformation, and how to understand a holistic picture rather than just looking at one single piece of evidence and saying, this is all we know about this question.
So is there an argument, though, that we can never have enough research, that why not ask more questions and do more research?
I love doing more research. I would say that for me, looking at these data, I would love to use this to focus the research. So in particular, it seems to me like a very core question is to try to narrow down how much diagnosis matters. And there's more we could do to try to understand, are the changes in how we're diagnosing responsible for 60% or 80% or 100% of the rise? And that would help us also understand what else are we looking for. Because if we could see which are the groups where diagnosis really doesn't seem to play a role, that might give us a clue as to where to look for other things that might play a role. I think there's far more research to be done, but that's the focus we should have on the research rather than some of the other focuses people might suggest.
In other words, when you focus on something that's already clear in the data, what's the argument there? It's a waste of time?
Yeah, I think spending a lot of time focusing on whether vaccines cause autism when we have quite clear data that they do not takes our attention away from understanding what is going on, which I think is a very important question. Some of what's a little frustrating about this dialogue is that in some cases, I think people almost seem to be dismissing the idea that we should learn more about this, which I think is absolutely not the right approach. But when we talk about learning more, we should try to learn more in the places we are uncertain rather than trying to learn more in places where we already know the answer.
What are you expecting or watching for come September when RFK Jr. has said he'll be able to announce a cause for autism?
Generally, when people promise answers to very, very hard questions in very, very short amounts of time, I tend to expect that the answer will feel incomplete. And so I'm not very optimistic that we can get an answer to this question by September.
Final thought or takeaway for our audience when it comes to this issue.
We're going to do better if we can all kind of acknowledge facts that are true. In this case, there's been a very large rise in autism diagnosis rates, and acknowledge that that is a concern to many people. And then from that platform, try to go with, curiosity and open-mindedness into the question of, what do we know? What do we not know? What would we like to know more about? Rather than immediately going into polarization. If we could depolarize this debate just a bit, that would really, really help.
Well, thank you so much to both of our guests today. Check out the Parent Data newsletter and Emily Oster's social media for much more data and tools that can help parents. And follow Paul Loudon on social media for more of his unique perspective into autism and how differences shape our society and lives. We'll link to it all for you in today's episode notes on our website, thenewsworthy.com. Thank you so much for listening today. Please consider sharing this episode with someone you think might enjoy it or benefit from it. And join us again during the week to stay updated on all the day's news. We provide 10-minute, fast, fair, fun news roundups every Monday through Friday. And then you get these more in-depth interviews every Saturday. So we'll be back on Monday with the latest news to know. Until then, have a great rest of your weekend.